Hello everybody and welcome to this video. It's a continuation in the series looking at what the 2017 GCSEs in English Literature teach us about the 2018 onwards GCSEs in English Literature. So we're looking at the examiners' reports, we're looking at our experience as examiners, we're looking at student feedback, past papers we've called back, all of that kind of thing, and we're giving you advice. Now this isn't how to attempt this section of the exam. That's covered in my English Literature playlist, but this is how to avoid the common mistakes from last year. And what we're looking at in this video is Paper 1, Section B, the 19th century fiction section of the exam. By far the most popular texts were A Christmas Carol and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so if you're studying those texts, you're in good company. Now, there's a lot of similarities between what students didn't do too well on in this section of Paper 1 with the Section A of Paper 1. So if you've not watched my video on that, make sure you watch that. But let me go through the major sort of issues that arose. The first one was there seems to have been an obsession this year with analysing word class in literature texts. I'm not sure where this has come from. It's not something I have been advocating. Perhaps it's because we're used to doing it in the English language exam. We start doing it in English literature now. I don't know. But there really is no great benefit to being able to identify the word class of various words that are in a text, and often students incorrectly identify the word class as well. The exam board feel this limits responses. You've actually got to think about the meanings and effects of specific words and images, and if you're limited to kind of saying, oh, look at these verbs or look at these adjectives or whatever it is, the exam board's feedback has been that that actually limits students. Of course, the main thing in English literature is that you have to answer the question. So whatever the particulars of the question are, if you find a word or phrase which is relevant to the answering of that question, then write about it, but you don't need to identify the word class that that word or phrase belongs to. It just holds students back. And I think what's happened, I've seen this in some of the student exemplars, is that students feel that is the analysis by sort of saying, oh, this is a noun and it means this. That is what they're, analysing. The analysis really is what is the specific effect of words or phrases or images. So I would suggest that in English literature you avoid commenting on what word class a word or phrase is part of, and so noun, adjective, adverb, that kind of thing. Don't worry about that. Just pick out words or phrases that have a specific effect and write about those. Doesn't really matter about the word class. Context, again, has been handled rather clumsily this year. I think the risk is that you can write a lot of context that isn't really relevant, again, to the question. So context is assessed, but that doesn't really mean that you need to write about biographical details of a writer's life, unless there's a very specific link to the answer to the question. So for example, a lot of students with answers to A Christmas Carol would write about Dickens's own life. A much better way to approach the context part of that question would be to write about the conditions the poor were suffering in Victorian Britain, the massive difference between the life of the rich and the life of the poor, and the suffering that resulted from that, rather than writing about Charles Dickens's own life. It's interesting to know about a writer's life, and I think obviously it often informs us in our understanding of a text, but don't get carried away in writing about biographical detail because, again, it really isn't very rare. It really isn't relevant to the question very much. The other thing to think about was quotations. Now, this was something that I think is quite interesting because they give you an extract, as they do, of course, in Section A as well. There was a tendency in both sections of the exam, in fact, for students to write out massive chunks of the text, quotations from the extract that were 4 or 5 lines long, and that is not helpful at all. As I go through in all of my videos, close analysis of words or short phrases is much more important. If you quote even a whole sentence from a text and you say the effect that sentence has, it's not precise enough because it won't be all of that quotation, all of that sentence that has that effect. It'll be the deliberate use of one or two words or phrases in particular. And you want to zoom in on those words. Write a lot about a little has been a mantra of GCSE English literature for years, and it continues to be so in this new spec. So short embedded quotations where you're picking the key words or phrases the writer has specifically used to have an effect on you, the reader, is essential in this exam. Once again, subject terminology, like in paper 1 section A, too often there was a focus on subject terminology for the sake of subject terminology, as if you being able to say what a simile is or pathetic fallacy, is actually going to gain you any marks, and it isn't. In fact, the exam board felt that students looking for particular subject terminology, that actually became a barrier. And what they want you to do is to, of course, answer the question, refer to and analyze the methods the writer uses, but don't feel that just because you can sort of say what something is, that's going to get you any marks. So very similar to paper 1 section A. I think the primary thing to talk about is you have to answer the question. So many students think, I'm going to start with a thing about context in here, I'm going to throw this in. No, it all depends on what the question is, and you have to answer the question, and always be answering the question. Never drift into, let me tell you something clever I know about the text or something I remember from lesson, but make sure every paragraph of your writing is answering the question. So as always, I'll just remind you, I do have my guide to English literature now available in paperback, £6.99 on Amazon, £3.99 for the ebook and Kindle edition. Pick up a copy if you haven't done so already, and do subscribe to the channel if you found this video useful.